Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another session of Cyber Conversations. I'm Kanti. I'm the director for the Cyber Institute. Today, I have with me one of the Cyber leaders, Naol Bulo, who is a fantastic curriculum developer. And I have our guest of honor today, Lianne Potter.
Hi.
Lianne is an award-winning cyber-anthropologist and security transformation leader who has experience in retail, healthcare, finance, private and nonprofit sectors. Her consultancy, the Anthrosecurist, enables teams in complex organizations to understand each other's motivations, to identify barriers that have prevented good security practices in the past, and also provide practical steps and insights to increase collaboration between the security team and the rest of the organization. Lianne is also the head of SecOps for the largest greenfield technology project in Europe, where she builds strategies to create sustainable security cultures throughout the organization. Lianne, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm Lianne Potter. So I wear very many hats when it comes to security, but my journey wasn't always in security. I have had many opportunities in my career to really focus on technology, but it started when it came to technology with looking at things like The Sims and playing around with my old computer and pretty much just having really terrible tech hump is what I call it. So this is my setup back in the 90s when we had one PC for everyone in the house and we had to take it in turns. We had a timer to go on the computer. I'd love to say that my kind of career into cybersecurity was that of the sort of traditional hacker, but it really wasn't. I was probably the most IT illiterate in the family, but by no means your sort of general techie or anything like that. In fact, throughout my kind of life, I've been looking at my career in terms of things I enjoy to do, and that's kind of what's always led me on the different paths of really finding joy. And it started off with my love of cinema. So when I was in my teens, I was a huge fan of cinema, and I had this idea in my head that maybe one day I would be a director or work in film using special effects, practical effects, that is. I was still in the days of doing practical effects. However, it's really hard industry to get in. I would even say maybe even harder than cybersecurity. So that kind of came to the wayside. So the closest I ever got to actually working in the film industry was I was an usher at a cinema. It was a beautiful cinema called the Hyde Park Picture House, which is one of the oldest cinemas in Europe that still exists today. And I'm very lucky. I recently donated to their refurbished project, and I now have a seat there. So now I will always have a place in Hyde Park Picture House, and it means quite a lot to me there. But keeping with the creative industries, again, didn't always consider IT to be a career for me. So I actually became a photographer, and I was a wedding photographer for 10 years before I even had any idea that tech would be waiting for me. And I absolutely loved that job. It was fantastic. It was really about the sort of customer experience, and I feel like that really helped me with my future career when I'm doing stakeholder management. It was during this time that I decided to figure out what could I do after wedding photography. Now, wedding photography is a great industry, but it's really brutal on your physical well-being, because you're carrying heavy equipment all the time. You're on your knees a lot to get that perfect shot. So it's very physically grueling. And so I tried to think of an exit plan, and I was very interested in the rituals of weddings. So I thought maybe anthropology would be interesting. Now, for those of you who don't know, that anthropology is the study of cultures, human cultures. It's about how they grow, thrive, and develop. And I started studying anthropology at master's level. My degree was in English literature, so again, totally untechnical. But as I was learning about cultures, I was really interested in digital cultures, in particular how digital cultures are formed and about how we identify ourselves in a virtual space. And that was really useful to me because eventually I got a job when I finished my master's in Leeds, which is my hometown, which was as a project manager looking at what's known as the digital divide. Now, the digital divide is where if you don't have access to the internet or online services, then you are socially disadvantaged in some way. And, many of us saw this during COVID when we saw households with, one laptop to share between them, and people have to do their work and they're studying on that. So in the job I was doing, I was seeing that in spades, that, I would go over to my clients' houses and they'd have very little in there. They haven't eaten in ages. Their electric's been cut off. Some people were about to be made homeless, and it was all because of the digital divide. And so I started thinking about how could I really make an effort to consider how these products and services that we were creating, the governments were creating, other industries were creating, were really leaving behind the most vulnerable people in society. So I thought, right, okay, if I'm going to do anything about this digital divide, I need to get hands-on, I need to get technical. So I decided to teach myself how to code. At age 30, I used all online free resources and spent every spare moment I possibly could teaching myself how to code, that my evenings, my weekends, saying no to family and friends to go out and things like that. It was really, really tough. I really enjoyed it though, as I say, using free online resources like Free Code Camp, Code Academy, YouTube, things like that, creating cat apps and things. And that was really good. And for the purposes of my journey, I'd like to share with you, it's an obscure reference, but I saw this in a charity shop or a thrift store, you might call it. And many of you probably won't know who Neil Sedaka is. I quite like Neil Sedaka because I used to listen to really old-fashioned music when I was a kid. But Neil Sedaka is a musician from the 1950s. But I found this record in a charity shop, and the cover art just made me giggle silly because Neil, bless him, he's neither laughing or crying on this. But I'd like to sort of show you an indication of my mood through the Neil Sedaka phases of life. So as I was learning how to code, I was really, really excited. I was more on the top left side of Neil Sedaka. It was really good. It was really interesting until, unfortunately, it got a lot harder. Now, there is a learning curve when you're teaching yourself how to code, and it starts off, you're doing really, really well, and you get really excited, and you think, I can do this, but then you hit some roadblocks. And when you get to that point, and you will, everyone does, what you really need to do is what I like to sort of refer to with my anthropologist hat on is find your tech tribe. Now, what I mean by that is find a community that can help you on your tech journey. When you're learning a new tech skill, you really need to surround yourself with people that have gone through that journey, that can help you, that can give you practical advice. For example, when I was constantly fat fingering it and not putting the right closures at the end of programming languages and things like that, you just need that kind of help, but also people to kind of cheer you on and tell you what the art of the possible was. Now, I was 30 years old and I'd decided that I was going to change careers completely and retrain into something I'd never ever done before. I needed people around me to kind of help me go on that journey, to understand that that was something I could physically do and that wasn't making the wrong choice. So going back to the Neil Sedaka framework, it made me very happy once I found my tech tribe. And that involved me going to things like networking events, meetups, and online communities. I would really recommend, regardless of what area of tech you're going to, whether it be cybersecurity or anything like that, don't limit yourself in the early stages to just that discipline. I would recommend going to as many different tech events as possible. Actually, because you're doing cybersecurity, you should probably go to as many different tech events as possible, because everything all connects to cybersecurity. Now, if I was, for example, a software developer, I could make that conscious decision and say, I'm going to just focus on JavaScript and become a JavaScript expert. But in cybersecurity, you have to be good at least a little bit at everything. And so it's really important to broaden your knowledge on that. So I was teaching myself how to code, and I found my tech tribe, and I was really happy. And I decided I would apply for a job that I saw advertised, which was for a graduate training scheme. And so I joined NHS Digital. Now, NHS is our National Health Service, or our hospitals, and this is the digital arm of it. And so it deals with medical technology. So I was really lucky that I managed to get a place on that scheme. And the way I sold it to them, bear in mind, I think at that point I was about teaching myself for 5 months. So I was only 5 months in before I got my first job in tech. I sold it to them and I said, look, I have seen the consequences of the digital divide, about organizations not catering to individuals that they're trying to serve, and I can help you put what we're building into perspective. And that's why I think it's really, really important that we have people from all different backgrounds and experiences, not just diversity in terms of gender, in terms of age or anything like that, but just diversity of experiences is really important in order to make sure that the products and services that we're creating or later on protecting really, really help people. So joining the NHS was a really important step in my career. I joined as a software developer. The reason why I joined as a software developer rather than cybersecurity is because they didn't actually have a cybersecurity program at the time for graduates. So even though it wasn't where I wanted to be, because I did want to be in cybersecurity, what I was thinking is, as long as I get a job in tech, I can pivot from there. And in particular, being part of software development, I could pivot into something like application security, for example. And I did quite well while I was at NHS Digital. I won an award for setting up a code club to teach people that what my journey really basically was is when I was learning to code, it was actually a revelation to me that it wasn't as difficult as films made out it to be. It wasn't as difficult as the industry made it out to be. Don't get me wrong, it's challenging, but it wasn't impossible, especially for someone with my background. So I put on courses for my peers at NHS Digital to learn how to code, and won an award for it. So I'm very pleased about that. But I did want to go into cybersecurity. So I would spend quite a lot of time speaking to the cybersecurity department at my organization and saying, please, 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 with the puppy dog eyes, let me in. I'll do a good job for you. I really want to learn everything I can. And it took an entire year before they would let me in because there was no program there available. And also because at the time, and it's got a lot better since, but at the time they were still under the impression that if you didn't have your traditional cybersecurity background, doing it at a degree level, doing it at master's level, and kind of working your way through that way, they didn't really believe that, that was possible for someone to teach themselves. But eventually they took a punt and I was able to join, after a year, the cybersecurity department. So on the Neil Sedaka line of things, it was a very, very happy time. And from there, I was able to really, as a SOC analyst, I was able to really understand what large-scale threats really were. So the threat landscape for an organization like the NHS, a big governmental organization that every person in the nation relies on, is something completely different to any other organization I've ever worked from since. We're talking about nation states, we're talking about big countries wanting to hack into NHS systems, not for financial gain, because the NHS system is not sort of structured in the same way as the US system is in terms of that, but in terms of kind of malicious practices like, causing disruption and stealing research as well, because most of our hospitals are connected to university hospitals. So any hospitals that are working on any new drugs or any other research, that becomes a really attractive target for other countries wanting to steal that data. I really enjoyed my time at NHS Digital. I learned an absolute shed load. Was recognised in quite a lot of my work for the work I was doing by applying anthropology to security. And I'd like to go into a little bit more about how I applied anthropology to security. So I could see that when I joined the security team, one of the biggest problems was that the security team weren't able to really engage the rest of the business. So when I was a software developer, nobody wanted to talk to the security team. And none of the other departments wanted to talk to the security team. And when you speak to doctors, not that they didn't care about security, but they just didn't understand the purpose of it. Because when you're doing a job like a doctor, you don't really need technology to be able to save someone's lives. We've done it fine for millennia without doing that. So how do you convince someone now that their job is now a huge security risk? It's very, very difficult. But I think you can achieve that through anthropology by understanding that we're motivated in different ways. We're motivated by becoming a collective. And I think a lot of security discourse is about using things, what's known as FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So scaring people into doing what we want them to do. Now, using things like fear, uncertainty, and doubt is very effective to a point. However, I'm sure if you watch the news, you become very desensitized to that kind of message, that message of always going, oh, you shouldn't click this, you shouldn't do that, all your bank details are going to be stolen. If someone's constantly telling you this message, you just stick your head in the sand eventually, or you just become numb to it. And so those messages become ineffective. But if you can sell security in a way that describes the collective endeavor about how we're all stronger together, a bit like you would when you think about, our ancient ancestors, trying to capture wild game to feed the tribe and things like that. Or if there's a predator coming up, you see the meerkats all jump up when they see something. That's the same thing when it comes to security. We need as many people, and that's security or not, with their eyes on the systems, so that they can give us that early warning signal, so that we can actually fight these attacks a lot sooner. And so using storytelling and things like participant observation becomes really, really important for being able to communicate security risks really effectively. Storytelling in particular is really interesting, because I would say as a human race, we are here today because of storytelling. It was that thing at the end of the day, we would sit around the campfire and we would tell stories. We'd tell stories to educate. We would tell stories to build communities. We tell stories to think about a future that's not yet happened, which is very unique to the human species. Not, animals don't really have that capacity to imagine a future that's not happened yet. And we also did it, to make sure that we were learning from mistakes. Now, I think in security, the traditional kind of narrative is to, again, either talk really negative about security, or talk really boring about security. There's a lot of, stuff that we do that is actually quite boring. But for some reason, we seem to focus on that when we're talking to people, like two-factor authentication, for example, or MFA, as you might call it. That's a really, really dull topic. It's an important topic, don't get me wrong, but it's incredibly dull. And does it really serve the people we're trying to protect by talking about these dull topics? I don't think so. But I think when you think about security, you can talk about security in a way that really inspires people. And I think we've got all the makings of a really interesting Hollywood blockbuster when it comes to security. So we've got incredible stories to tell. We've got heroes and villains. We've got heists and hacks and things like that. But instead, we choose to bore people. So I would really encourage you on your sort of cybersecurity journey to kind of think, is that the best way forward for talking about security and about sharing that narrative? If you really want to get the best out of people, make it interesting is my sort of call to you. So I was working in NHS Digital, but then I got an offer to be part of another organisation, which was Security Transformation Project. And that was basically working in a organisation that really wanted to update its IT infrastructure, and it wanted to make sure that the security function was really exciting on top of that. And it was a really great opportunity for me to be able to work with old systems and actually bring them forward into new and important environments. And that extends till recently, where I've got a job as head of security operations at a supermarket in the UK. And this supermarket in particular is going through its own transformation. It's not quite the same as the transformation I did in the previously, in which, you know, it was old systems to new systems. It's actually, we're rebuilding our systems from scratch. So we're not improving on old systems, but we're completely rebuilding from scratch. And in my remit at the moment, I'm looking at things like, so I cover the SOC, incident response, DevSecOps, which relates to application security, cloud security, network security, security awareness. And I also look after a group of cybersecurity consultants. And what I really love about the job I'm currently doing is that it allows me to see all different aspects of cybersecurity from a technical perspective. And it allows me to keep my skills really sharp and fresh. And I'm really pleased to say that I've been able to build a team from scratch. So it started off with just a handful of us when I joined, and now we're 15 strong, constantly hiring people. And I've been very lucky to be able to recruit really well in my team. So currently I have a more than a 50-50 gender divide in my team. Actually, I have more women than men in my team, which for a technical team, that's almost unheard of. I think it's by being a very kind of prominent leader in the community, and about sort of sharing my experience of how I got into tech. And I think that's really important. So I will often do very silly videos with asking people, do they know their Tor onions and onion layers and things like that, to kind of show that it's quite a fun-loving team, because I think security can really be fun. Some people argue otherwise, mostly people that don't work in security, but I think security is one of the most exciting industries, and I am so pleased that I took that plunge and retrained from it. And that's my journey.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. That was fantastic to hear, like how you went from English lit to anthropology to now being a cyber anthropologist. So that is absolutely fascinating.
It's all about using, you know, the skills that you've gained over the years and applying them to different industries. The joy of working in tech is that tech now touches everything. You know, there is no real differentiation between, you know, we used to say the virtual world and the real world. There is none. We live just as much in both worlds. And it's really important to recognize that every skill that you have is applicable to tech. And I think sometimes people are very blinkered in thinking it's just technical skills. No, we need design skills. We need people that can talk about things, people with a sort of genuine interest. You know, even my love of film helps me be a better cybersecurity person, because I know how to tell a story, because I've watched so many films and things like that. Just even little interests like that. Please do not, if you're thinking about a career in cybersecurity, squander those or push them down. It's those interests and those things that you can add that really make you a better cybersecurity person.
And that's so true. Also, there was one point that you mentioned that kind of struck with me. It's that we make the cyber things sound so boring to non-technical people. And I think that plays a huge part in how we address the problem, how we get others to understand. Yes, in cyber, you know, we're all aware of what the risks are. We're aware of what bad actors can do, but how do we communicate all of that in a manner that will make it interesting to other people so that they understand what's going on and they retain that knowledge? I think that's a huge challenge that we're facing.
Oh yeah, massively. And you know, I know I keep going back to like film, television, but you remember your favorite film, you know every single character on there, you know every single line. It's because it was interesting. And if you want people to retain the best practices for protecting themselves online, you've got to make it interesting. And so when you're thinking about narratives, particularly when you first join your own cybersecurity organizations, remember, you know, people come to work, but they probably care about their own personal cybersecurity a lot more than the organizational. So if you can kind of use your cybersecurity discussions, training to more frame them as an individual, like this is how you protect yourselves. honestly, it's exactly the same for protecting your organization. So it's a win-win. You get an engaged audience that actually cares about protecting themselves. They will use those skills, yeah, and the things you've taught them to protect the organization. You've just got to remember to come from it from a way that you would like yourself to learn about cybersecurity. And I think it comes a lot with kind of being brave to kind of break the status quo of what has been before when it comes to cybersecurity practices. And you will find that sometimes, I've gone into organizations that have been very fuddy-duddy in how they approach security. And so I come in and I start talking about anthropology and security, and I'm met with glazed looks. But keep persevering, because this stuff does work.
It really does. I like your point of, remembering to keep it interesting for the other folks.
Mm.
So I have a couple more questions, based on what I found on LinkedIn, based on some about what you talked and all of that stuff. So you are the head of SecOps at an organization, right? So what does your day look like? Like emails, a bunch of meetings. What does it look like?
Yeah, I wish I was still as technical as I used to be, but now I'm in a senior position. You do have to make a trade-off. So I get to just really enjoy what everyone else is doing, to be honest. So my day-to-day, as I said, I'm currently building a cybersecurity function from scratch. So it's about identifying needs. So speaking to the business itself, so the supermarket itself, and saying, okay, so what do we need to do to protect our customers today and tomorrow? And by tomorrow, I mean big picture tomorrow, making sure that we are well prepared for any attacks that, that could come in the future. And that comes with an understanding of technologies that are coming over the hill. So in the business, for example, we do obviously grocery shopping in person, bricks and mortar stores. So that in the stores, we've got to make sure that the tills are all protected. We've got to make sure that any computers that are in the building are all protected. We have devices in which individuals can scan as they're walking around the shop, so that the computer just takes it on. You just pay, and so you don't have to speak to a checkout person at all. So they need to be protected. And then you think logistically, I've got warehouses. There's robots in those warehouses. I've got to protect those. And then obviously we've got an online presence as well. So we do online shopping, food shopping. So there's so many moving plays. And then you hear the business going, well, I want to embed this new technology into the website, for example. So you've got to be an expert on that. So what is this technology? How is this going to meet the business needs? Because you really want to support the business to meet those needs. Because to be honest, the business pays your wages. So it's in your interest to make sure that the business is profitable. And I think a lot of security people forget that. I always say I'm in the business of, protecting our organization so we can sell more beans. And it's very true. So it's about understanding what the business really needs and enabling the business to be innovative. There are times when you will have to say no, but I try to keep those to a minimum. There's always a secure solution out there. And one of my pet peeves is that the security team is known for just saying no a lot. And it does us no favors. It makes people not want to engage with us, because in a modern organization that's running at 100 miles an hour, 100 miles a minute, you really need to ensure that you're going along with the pace of that. Otherwise, they don't engage, and then they engage in risky security behaviors that take a long time to fix, become costly, and then resentment builds. So I would really say that my sort of role as head of SecOps is to ensure that resentment doesn't build. It's about really preempting what we will need as a business, and that's working with my SOC, so Security Operations Center and Incident Response, making sure that whatever's onboarded, we're monitoring that, and we know how to respond if something does happen. All the way down to things like the DevSecOps programs, so who help with the websites and all the programming, making sure that when people are writing things, that right from the beginning, we're catching things really early, so that doesn't delay things. And then network security and cloud security, and making sure that all those little elements are really in line and ready to serve the business from day one and going forward.
That's a lot of things.
It's fun though. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy my job.
I'm glad. So since you are relatively newer to the cyber field, want to say relatively newer, have you seen any, organizations, initiatives that work to, towards more diversity, towards more inclusion in the field? Then do you feel like there's been a difference since you've been in the field to now?
I think it's always getting, year on year, it's always getting better. I remember when I first decided to retrain, I'd read about like bro culture because I was retraining like software development because that was going to be my easy way into cyber. I honestly assumed it was an old-fashioned thing and that I was probably reading old articles. But my first day in tech was a bit of a rude awakening. So I got into the office early on my first day in tech, and I sat at my desk, and none of my team were in just yet. And I was hidden behind a wall of monitors because I'm a wee diddy thing in real life. So monitors hide me. And I overheard someone in another team, not my team, but in another team say, "Oh, you know why they've hired a load of women recently, don't you, for diversity inclusion reasons?" And to be called a diversity hire on my first day when I was really excited about coming into tech was such a gut punch. I'm grateful that I was 30 at the time because I confronted that person straight away. But I have no doubt that had I been like maybe straight out of university or something like that, first job, I probably wouldn't have confronted that. So I've made it my mission ever since to be very vocal and call out bad behavior like that, and to share my journey into tech and to share that story, mostly so that I can leave the tech industry in a better place than I found it. And I can do that by being an advocate for more diversity in tech, by, and as I say, by being more visual as a female leader in tech. It enables me to hire more female leaders. I always hire the best person for the job. Don't get me wrong; it's nothing to do with gender. But I think being a very prominent leader in tech, and putting videos out there showing it's a female leadership, it does attract more female candidates. So I think there's definitely little things we can do for that. I'm also on the board for a community enterprise called Women in Leads Digital, which is about retaining tech talent in Leeds, female tech talent in Leeds, and showing them the opportunities that are available in my hometown as well.
Again, it's about advocating, right? It's not just necessarily we're only wanting women in this role, but yes, let's, pay a little bit more attention. Let's look at their qualifications. Let's advocate for them a little bit more.
Yeah. You always want to be, and it comes to networking. Like I wouldn't be here today. I mentioned my tech tribe. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't working on my network, surrounding myself not just with great women, but great men who would be great allies as well. You always want to make sure you're in a position in life where if there's an opportunity going, someone will mention your name. And that can be male or female. And I think it's really important to make sure that you really work hard at that networking piece. It's not easy, don't get me wrong. I'm naturally, you might not think it, but I am naturally an introvert, and I do find it very, very difficult to do, but it just pays off in dividends. And since I've only ever really applied for one job in tech, that was my very first one. The rest have come from network recommendations, like people recommending me for roles and things like that. And that's the power of really building your network. And I've had so many amazing opportunities through my network. I've managed to had all expensive trips paid to abroad, to deliver talks and things like that, just because of the strength of my network. So the opportunities it can bring are phenomenal. And I would say it's a really important, learn the tech, but learn to network. To me, it's just as important.
Yeah. So you mentioned you learned how to code. Do you have a favorite programming language?
Yeah, so I started off in JavaScript, and then at NHS Digital I was .NET C#, as that's what they kind of predominantly worked in. But when I joined the SOC, I got really into Python. It really helped me be able to automate a lot of my work. So I remember my first day in the SOC, I was doing a lot of manual work. You do in tier 1, unfortunately. Tier 1's not the most exciting job in the world, but stick with it, because you do get exposed to a lot of really interesting things. But predominantly it was me looking at reports, moving things on spreadsheets, and closing off alerts. I thought there's a better way to do this, so I wrote myself a script, because that job was taking me all day to do. So I wrote myself a script in Python, and I turned a full day job into one click. And then I was just like, okay, what have you got left for me to do now? So they were very pleased that I managed to save the company pretty much one full-time equivalent employee doing a day job with just Python scripts. So yeah, I'm always grateful for Python for automating boring stuff.
It is very versatile. So then, are there any challenges that you faced, after you've come into tech field? Were there any challenges that you faced, and how did you come out of them?
The biggest challenge is, I would say, myself. And you probably were waiting for this, because I'm sure it comes up a lot, but imposter syndrome is hasn't stopped, is incredibly difficult to deal with. Coming from a utterly non-technical background and saying I want to retrain for a technical role, kind of thinking about it in the grandiose scales of that, it can make you really doubt yourself. And there was a lot of times where I was just really found it so challenging to sort of carry on. Again, that's where having people around you to kind of cheer you on and say you're doing it right became really important. And then obviously that incident where someone said, I was only here just to tick a box rather than on merit. Bearing in mind, I also did the interview and the tech test to kind of get in as well, just like everyone else, but never mind. But constantly having that feeling that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be here, someone's going to find me out, someone's going to realize that I'm not one of them or anything like that, is always a challenge. Even today, I'm running a whole department, very senior level, I report directly to the CISO. In terms of things like that, I should be feeling quite confident in my abilities, but I don't think it ever really goes away. And I don't think that's anything to do with me personally. I think it's just the nature of the beast in terms of tech. I try and remind myself that regardless of how smart people are, nobody knows everything, even if you think they do. And I've got to remind myself that I am also one of those people that doesn't know everything, and kind of cut myself some slack. So there'll be some days where I'll be really kind of frustrated at myself. Maybe a new technology's come in and I don't really know it as well as I feel like I should. But the recognition that, everyone in tech is constantly learning. Everyone feels like everyone knows more than them. And the best way you can do to tackle that is cut yourself some slack, but also surround yourself by, people that are willing to teach you, they're willing to explain things to you as well. And kind of having the guts to say, I don't know, is one of the biggest lessons that's taken me on tech. And having no ego about saying, I don't know what you're talking about, please explain that to me again. And sometimes you find that the people who are explaining something will turn around, actually, I don't quite know either. But otherwise most people are very willing to kind of teach you and train you up. And saying I don't know is probably the best way to learn, I would say, in life, because you're only harming yourself if you don't say those words.
So I couldn't agree with you more. Sometimes it's imposter syndrome where you feel like, oh, maybe I'm not qualified enough, maybe I'm not smart enough to be here. But sometimes it's just that we simply don't know something, and having to, or being able to acknowledge that, to actually say, oh, I don't know what that means. It takes a lot of courage, at least when you first start implementing that. But as time goes on, you'll find, like you had said, that it's one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself, is just say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out, or I'm going to learn what that means. Yeah. It becomes a very powerful thing for you to do for yourself.
Mm. And I think, as you know, as I say, going back to cybersecurity in general, the nature of the beast is that, cybersecurity touches everything, and it's impossible for you to know everything. But obviously, when you go into an organization, if someone's looking at you as a security person, for example, a developer, it's like, I expect you to know this security person, but you can't. So I would also say, yield on other experts. If a developer asks me a security question and I don't know, I'm like, this is your area. You tell me how you think it would work. And then I can obviously apply the security principles to that. But it's about being more willing to share expertise. And I think we can always do better as that as an industry.
Yeah. It's like, when people hear, or I don't know if that's still happening, but when people hear that you're in IT and they ask you to fix their computer for you,
Yes.
not everybody knows what's going on. Most of the time we're in different parts of IT. We're not all qualified or have the knowledge on how to fix a computer. So it's something similar, I feel.
Oh yeah, totally. You wouldn't say to a general practitioner or a GP, come do heart surgery on me, would you? So
Exactly. So then, since you've been in the field for a while, what are some qualities that you think a successful cybersecurity professional should have, and how can someone develop those qualities?
So when I'm hiring new people, I'm looking for passion. Now, the industry frames passion in very different ways. Now, there's been a lot of debate about, does passion mean this individual spends their whole entire life dedicated to cybersecurity, they don't have any life, this is it. I don't mean passion in that sense. I do, full power to people that that do have that kind of dedication and things like that, but I'm very much a proponent of work-life balance. So I would rather passion comes from just the interest in the industry. And I think that's really important, because this industry can at times be quite grueling, because you're constantly being bombarded with threats. The type of projects we work on don't ever really end. So it's not like, like, okay, now we're secure. We're never 100% secure. So it's a very much a treadmill style kind of environment. So you need to love what you're doing. I would say if you have any doubt that you don't love what you're doing, or love the idea of cybersecurity, really rethink it, because it really is kind of, in some cases, can be very, very unrelenting. So I'm looking for passion. That doesn't necessarily mean at the expense of work life. I'm also looking for really good communicators. And I think it's a really underutilized skill in tech in general, but particularly in cybersecurity, because most of, I would say, a cybersecurity person's job is convincing people to change their behaviors, which is why I think things like anthropology, psychology, behavioral science, behavioral economics is so incredibly important in terms of background, or even marketing, to be honest. Being able to convince someone to change their behaviors and articulate those comprehensively is so incredibly important. Being able to debate and healthily debate with people, or compromise, learning that act of compromise is really important. So communication skills to me is right up there. And honestly, ability to learn is up there. But if I see someone with potential, I'm not really fussed if they got loads and loads of years of experience. If they're willing to learn, then I'll take them on. I'm also not really bothered about certs and things like that, because I really would rather ensure that I've got the right people being able to deliver the right message when it comes to security, because I think historically that's something we've not been able to do well.
Makes a lot of sense. And then unfortunately, we're almost out of time. So I'll wrap up the session with a last question. What advice do you have for young people that are watching this video?
My advice would be, find a community. I don't think I would have done it, to be honest, if I hadn't found that community. It doesn't have to be a big community. It doesn't have to be a cybersecurity community, but it just needs people that will cheer you on, when you're going through this learning journey, because it's all learning journeys are difficult. You know, if you're teaching yourself how to play piano or anything like that, there's always going to be a learning curve. And if you're going to be successful at it, it's best to have people around you that are going to support you on this journey and keep you motivated to do so, because I really can't express what a change in my life retraining for career cybersecurity is. I came from a working class background. My mum was a single parent, lived in quite poor surroundings, things like that. My life has utterly changed since having a career in cybersecurity. I would never imagine that I would be earning what I'm earning now, and having the freedoms that I have now that comes with that, and being able to be mentally challenged in my job in a really positive way. That's the really exciting part of my job, is I'm mentally challenged. I also can have the opportunity to constantly learn. I will never be able to stop learning, otherwise I'll be completely out of a job in cybersecurity. So I would say that if you're really serious about a career in cybersecurity, find someone to come on this journey with you and support you. Maybe they've already been there before, maybe they're going on it with you. It's really, really important.
I couldn't agree with you more. I wouldn't necessarily call it a very tough field to break into, but in order for you to take that first step, in order for you to take the next step and keep your feet in the field, you need that community. Sometimes that makes a really huge difference in whether you're staying there, or if you feel, oh no, this, all people here, they're very, misogynistic, or, they're not, something like that. And you feel, oh no, this is not for me. I don't want to be in that kind of culture. It's at that point where you can rely on your people, where they can say, yes, you deserve to be there. Yes, you're smart enough to be there. And, kind of like a little pick me up, I call it. So, well, thank you. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Cyber Conversations. We are so grateful that you took time out of your day to be here today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.